The question of why is a great question. It is one of the greatest metaphysical questions that you will ever deal with. And they discussed it for over 30 chapters in this oldest book of antiquity. And they still had not come up with a good answer. They had partial answers, as you will be able to come up with partial answers in your life, but maybe not the answer. And I talked to you yesterday on how the whirlwind developed. And they did not even notice it until it got to a point to where it was more like a small tornado. And could you imagine being in a position to where they looked up and they finally understood that God spoke to them? What an incredible epiphany that would be. That God spoke to man. But what He said may not be what you think He should have said. If you start in chapter 38 of this book, God starts to rain down upon them questions. And He looks at Job and He said, "Stand up like a man. Answer me if you can. Where were you when I created this universe? Where were you when I separated the land from the sea? Where were you when I created the animals?" 70 questions, all directed at Job. 70 questions, all directed at mankind. In other words, they're also directed at you. 70 questions to cause you to see the chasm between man and God. To cause you to see the strength of God and the weakness of man. To cause you to see the greatness of God and the weakness of man. Everything there, every question designed to drive the nail into the coffin of who are you to call God into question. And after 70 questions showing Job who he was in relation to God, then God said, "What do you have to say?" And Job said nothing. People change when they come into the presence of God. When you actually come into the presence of God, the questions change. There will be times in your life when you will want to say, "God, why?" That's the whole question here. Why did this happen? And you may burn with wanting an answer. And you may want to shake your fist at God. But if you ever come into the presence of God, and that's why it's so important to have your theology correct before you get into pain, before you get into loss and suffering and death. Because as I said yesterday, you do not see clearly in pain. You do not see clearly when you're going through the sufferings of life. And what Job understands is that now he's not concerned with why. He is concerned with who. That is why Isaiah said, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." Job understood that he could not stand in judgment of God. And he came to the conclusion, this is what he said. He said, "All of my life I have heard about you. But now I see you." That's what many of you would say. All of your life you've heard about God. But understand this, if your theology is correct, it is during the times of pain and suffering and loss and yes, even death, it is then that you see God. More than any other time. Job had an audience with the Creator of the universe. He had a chance to ask God why. God gave him the chance. And when it came down to it, it wasn't even important anymore. If you understand the who is in charge of this universe, the question of why just recedes into insignificance. If you have a relationship with who is in charge, the question of why things happen just aren't that important anymore. For you see, if you read the story, there is a backstory. There is a story where God talked to Satan, and Satan challenged God, and God gave him the right to persecute, to do these things to Job. But Job never knew. Job never knew the backstory. Just as you, in all likelihood, will never know the backstory. You will never know why. Why bad things happen to good people. Why bad things happen to you. But understand there is divine involvement in human suffering. And even though Job had no reason to believe there was a gracious and loving God, God knew exactly what was going on in his life, and He knows exactly what's going on in your life. Even when you cannot see through the fog, when you cannot see through the darkness, when you have no reason to believe in a loving God, He knows what's going on. I had a person tell me this once, and it kind of set me on my heels, and I did not have a good answer at the time. But I have an answer now. And it may not be that good, but I want to share it with you. Because a person looked me in the eye and they said, why would you want to worship a God that allows that kind of suffering, that would allow Satan to do to Job what Satan did to Job? God allowed it. And as I thought about that, I came to understand that the pain and the suffering and the loss and the death, that's on me. That's on you. Because of our choices in life. Because of original sin. Because of what Adam did. And guess what? You would have done exactly what Adam and Eve did. That's what let pain into this universe. That's what let loss and suffering and death. We're the ones that set that in motion, not God. God gave us the free will and He allows things to happen, but that is on our back. We did that. So don't blame God for the pain and the suffering and the loss and the death. That's totally on us. A couple of things in finishing. After Job stayed true to God, and he makes this statement in chapter 13, verse 15. He said, even if God slay me, even if God kills me, I'll still trust in God. That's what faith is all about. He had no reason to believe in God, had no reason to trust in God. But he said, what happens to me in life is not going to affect my relationship with God. I believe there is divine involvement in my life. And if you read the end of it, it says that everything was restored to Job. That he received a double portion. All of his flocks and herds, it was restored to him. Where he had 7,000, now he had 14,000. His children were restored to him. His wife was restored. Everything that he had lost, he had restored. Now you might say, well, that doesn't happen in real life. I don't see that happening for everybody. But you need to understand the principle is true. And that is a double portion. And that is if you have a relationship with God. If you have the faith to say, even if He slay me, yet will I trust in Him. It'll be restored to you. If not in this world, then in the next. Because there is one more point that I want to share with you that you can see in this oldest book, the oldest book of antiquity, the oldest book ever written that we have an account of. Job, when he has lost everything, when he is sitting in a garbage dump with a piece of broken pottery scratching his sores that are oozing pus and blood, when he can hardly see because the boils on his face make it hard for him to open his eyes, he says this. He says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that I shall see Him in the flesh. And even if my flesh rots off of my skeleton, I will see God. You have the hope. No, it's not a hope. It is a prophecy. Maybe more than a prophecy, a promise. In this book, the oldest of books, a promise of life after death. You have the promise of the resurrection of the body. And that is why what you want to take away with you when you go through the pain and the loss and the suffering and death in your life, that there is divine involvement in what you are going through. And if you stay true to God, if you have a relationship with the who that created the universe, the question of why will just fade into the background of insignificance. And you'll understand that one day, maybe not in this life, one day, the principle of the double portion will be applied to me. And everything that I have lost, everything that has been taken captive. In fact, in the last chapter, the word, it says, the things that were taken captive from Job was given back to him double fold. When Satan captures your health, when he causes you to lose your wealth, and then when he steals your very life, understand that there is a God who will give it all back to you. You'll get a double portion, if not in this life, in the life to come. And I believe in the life to come because this man by the name of Job, the first prophet, said that I know that my Redeemer lives. And if that prophecy is true, as I believe it is true, we will have a resurrection. And we will see our Redeemer in the flesh. I want to end by reading an epitaph. If you ever go to Philadelphia, there are many things that had to do with the start of this country that happened in Philadelphia. They have Constitution Hall where you can go and see the actual place where the Declaration of Independence was signed, where our Constitution was signed. And from Constitution Hall, if you walk about a quarter of a mile and go into the old city of Philadelphia, There is a church called Christ Church where many of the founding fathers worshiped. And there is a cemetery there where many of the founding fathers are buried. And if you walk past the fence that borders the cemetery, you walk right by his grave, and you have to go by it and go into the main gate, and then you take a sharp right, and you go to one of the corners. And it is the grave of Ben Franklin, who was the best known man of the 18th century, a first-rate scientist, one of the founders of this country. And you can stand and look at his grave, and he has an epitaph on his grave that is not this, but it is right up against the fence, and there is a brick column that comes up, and on that brick column are these words, and I took a picture. If you remember, Ben Franklin was a publisher. He was a writer. And I'll leave you with the words of one of the greatest men this country has ever produced. And this is what it says, and one day you may be able to see these words for yourself. Here lies the body of Benjamin Franklin, a printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out, and its script of its lettering and gilding lies here, food for worms. But the work shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and a more elegant edition, corrected and improved by the author. That's what Benjamin Franklin wrote. It is the same message that we see in Job. And it is proven true when 2,000 years ago, the one they called Jesus of Nazareth walked out of a tomb. Because he is the Redeemer. And he is the one that after this body has rotted off of his skeleton, that I will say, and I believe as Job believed, I know that my Redeemer lives, and I will see him in the flesh